Close your eyes now and let your breathing slow. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of an ancient city. The sun is setting behind walls of golden stone, and the air carries the scent of distant spices. Tonight, we travel together along one of humanity's greatest achievements, a network of paths and trails that stretched across deserts and mountains, connecting civilizations that had never known each other existed. This is the Silk Road. For nearly 2,000 years, traders, pilgrims, and adventurers walked these routes, carrying silk and silver ideas and beliefs from the shores of the Mediterranean to the heart of China, and everywhere in between. As you settle deeper into comfort, let your mind wander back through centuries, to a time when the world was both larger and more mysterious, when a journey of 1,000 miles began with a single step, and every step was an act of courage. The desert wind whispers now, carrying echoes of camel bells and merchant calls, of languages long forgotten, and stories waiting to be told. Let the rhythm of this ancient road carry you as we begin our journey. Our story begins in China, in the 2nd century before the Common Era, during the reign of the Han dynasty. Emperor Wu sat upon his throne, troubled by reports from the northern steppes. The Xiongnu, fierce nomadic warriors, threatened his borders. Their horses were swift, their archers deadly, and the emperor needed allies. In the year 138 BCE, Wu summoned a young official named Zhang Qian. The emperor had heard rumors of tribes far to the west, people called the Yuezhi, who had been driven from their homeland by the very Xiongnu who now threatened China. Perhaps these displaced people would join with the Han to defeat their common enemy. Zhang Qian accepted this mission, knowing the dangers that lay ahead. He would need to cross lands controlled by the Xiongnu themselves, traverse deserts where water was scarce, and find a people no Chinese had ever met. With a small band of followers, Zhang Qian departed from the capital of Chang'an, the city we now know as Xi'an. Walking westward through the Hexi corridor, that narrow passage between mountains and desert, he carried with him the hopes of an empire. But fortune did not favor the brave envoy. Not far into his journey, Zhang Qian was captured by the Xiongnu. The very enemies he sought to outflank now held him prisoner. For 10 long years, Zhang Qian lived among his captors. He married a Xiongnu woman, had children, and waited, always waiting for his chance to continue his mission. And then one day, an opportunity arose. Zhang Qian escaped, not back to China, but westward, still determined to find the Yuezhi, still faithful to his emperor's command. He crossed the Pamir Mountains, those peaks so high they were called the roof of the world, where the air grew thin and cold, and snow clung to the slopes even in summer. Beyond the mountains, Zhang Qian found the lands of Fergana, and there he saw horses unlike any in China, tall and powerful, swift as the wind. These were the famed Fergana horses, which the Chinese would later call the heavenly horses. He traveled on through Sogdiana, through Bactria, lands where Greek influence still lingered from the conquests of Alexander the Great. Here were cities with colonnaded temples, merchants who spoke of routes leading to Rome itself, a world utterly different from anything Zhang Qian had known. At last, he found the Yuezhi. But the years had changed them. They had settled in fertile lands, grown prosperous, and had no desire for revenge against the Xiongnu. The alliance Zhang Qian sought would not come to pass, yet his mission was far from a failure. Zhang Qian began his long journey home, carrying knowledge more valuable than any treaty. He had seen the wider world, knew of kingdoms and empires stretching westward, knew of goods that would dazzle the Chinese court, of trade routes that could bring wealth beyond imagination. Again he was captured by the Xiongnu. Again he waited, and again he escaped. Finally, in 126 BCE, 13 years after his departure, Zhang Qian returned to Chang'an. Of the 100 men who had left with him, only he and one servant survived. But what he brought back changed history. He told Emperor Wu of the lands beyond the western mountains, of the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms where Greek culture flourished, of the Parthian Empire that controlled trade to the Mediterranean, of goods like grapes and alfalfa, of horses that could transform Chinese cavalry, and most importantly, he told of peoples eager to trade, of routes that could connect China to the wider world. Emperor Wu listened and began to act. The Han launched military campaigns to secure the western approaches. They pushed back the Xiongnu, established garrisons along the Hexi corridor, and opened the doors to trade. Zhang Qian himself returned to the west on a second mission, this time with official trading delegations. He would be remembered as the father of the Silk Road, the man whose curiosity and courage connected East and West. Within decades, Chinese silk began appearing in distant lands. The Romans encountered this marvelous fabric during the reign of Julius Caesar. They called the distant land from which it came Serica, the land of silk, never knowing the full journey those shimmering threads had taken. And so the Silk Road was born, not from a single moment of planning, but from one man's impossible journey, from years of patience and persistence, from the human desire to know what lies beyond the horizon. As you rest now, consider Zhang Qian, spending a decade in captivity, never abandoning his mission, crossing mountains so high the sky turned dark, returning home against all odds. The Silk Road began with footsteps, and tonight we follow where they lead. The Silk Road was never a single road. Imagine instead a web of paths, spreading across the largest continent on Earth. Some routes hugged the edges of deserts, others climbed through mountain passes, still others sailed across seas. Let us trace these ancient ways. From Chang'an in eastern China, the route headed west through the Hexi corridor. This narrow passage, sometimes only a few miles wide, ran between the Tibetan Plateau to the south and the Gobi Desert to the north. The Gobi is a land of extremes. In summer, temperatures can soar above 45 degrees Celsius. In winter, they plunge to 40 below. The wind howls across barren plains, carrying dust that stings the eyes and fills the lungs. Travelers learn to move through the Gobi in stages, resting at oasis towns like Dunhuang, where springs bubbled up from the earth, and Buddhist monks carved caves into the cliffsides. Beyond the Gobi lay an even greater challenge, the Taklamakan Desert. The very name Taklamakan carried a warning. Some say it meant, "Go in and you won't come out." Others translated it as the place of no return. This vast sea of sand, covering over 300,000 square kilometers, was among the most forbidding places on Earth. Traders had two choices. The northern route skirted the edge of the Taklamakan, passing through oasis towns fed by snowmelt from the Tian Shan Mountains, towns like Turfan and Kucha, where grapes grew in abundance, and travelers could rest before the next leg of their journey. The southern route followed a different path, hugging the foothills of the Kunlun Mountains, passing through Khotan, famous for its jade. Both routes eventually reunited at Kashgar, the great crossroads of Central Asia. From Kashgar, the road climbed into the mountains. The Pamir Range rose like a wall between worlds. Passes here reached elevations of 5,000 meters and more. The Karakoram Pass, one of the highest in the world, stood at over 5,500 meters, where the air held only half the oxygen of sea level. Travelers suffered from altitude sickness. Their heads pounded, their lungs burned. Animals struggled under their loads. Many who attempted these crossings in winter never emerged from the snow. Yet the mountains offered something the desert could not: water. Glacial streams cascaded down slopes, feeding valleys where traders could rest. The cold preserved food, slowed the spread of disease, and the sheer difficulty of the crossing protected merchants from bandits, who rarely ventured so high. Beyond the Pamirs lay the fertile lands of Central Asia. The Fergana Valley spread green and welcoming, fed by rivers flowing from the mountains. Here grew the alfalfa that would transform Chinese agriculture. Here grazed the heavenly horses that Zhang Qian had first described. Further west lay Samarkand and Bukhara, cities of domes and minarets, where Persian and Turkic cultures mingled, where scholars debated philosophy, and merchants counted gold coins from a dozen kingdoms. The routes continued through Persia, through the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, until at last they reached the ports of the Mediterranean. But there was another way. The maritime Silk Road followed the coastlines and the monsoon winds. Ships sailed from Chinese ports like Guangzhou and Quanzhou, heading south to Vietnam and Malaysia, west to India and Sri Lanka, and onward to the Arabian Peninsula and the Red Sea. These sea routes were faster than the overland paths. A journey that took a year by land might take only months by sea. Ships could carry heavier goods, like the prized Chinese ceramics, too fragile to survive the jolting of camel caravans. Yet the seas had their own dangers. Monsoon storms could destroy entire fleets. Pirates lurked in narrow straits. And the voyage was one of total commitment. Once you sailed, there was no turning back until the winds changed season. Whether by land or sea, the journey from China to Rome was immense. Over 6,400 kilometers of overland travel, through some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Few, if any, travelers completed the entire route. Instead, goods passed from hand to hand. Each merchant knew his segment of the road, bought goods at one end of his familiar territory, and sold them at the other. A bolt of silk might change hands a dozen times, each exchange adding to its price, until by the time it reached Rome, it cost its weight in gold. The geography of the Silk Road shaped everything. It determined where cities grew, which peoples prospered, what goods were traded. Even today, the routes carved by ancient merchants influence borders and politics. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine the endless landscape, the sand dunes rippling like frozen waves, the mountains piercing clouds, the oases glittering like emeralds in the desert. This was the world the Silk Road crossed, and we journey on. Along the Silk Road arose great cities. Some grew from ancient settlements. Others were founded by emperors and conquerors. All became crossroads where cultures met and mingled. Let us visit them now. We begin in Chang'an, the city of perpetual peace, capital of China during the Tang dynasty, and the eastern anchor of the Silk Road. In its golden age, Chang'an was the largest city in the world. Over 1 million people lived within its walls, which stretched 9 kilometers from east to west and 8 kilometers from north to south. The city was laid out in perfect symmetry. Wide avenues ran straight as arrows. Neighborhoods were organized in rectangular wards. At the center stood the imperial palace, where emperors received ambassadors from across the known world. The western market of Chang'an was legendary. Here, merchants from Persia sold rugs and jewels. Traders from India offered spices and incense. Sogdian merchants dealt in horses and furs. Musicians and acrobats entertained the crowds, speaking a babel of languages. Foreigners were welcomed in Chang'an. Some stayed for years, even generations. Persians became officials in the Tang court. Arabs commanded Chinese armies. The city embodied the cosmopolitan spirit of the Silk Road itself. Traveling west from Chang'an, through the Hexi corridor, we come to Dunhuang. This oasis town sat at the edge of the desert, the last outpost before the fearsome Taklamakan. Here, travelers prepared for the journey ahead, loading camels with water and provisions, offering prayers for safe passage. But Dunhuang's true treasure lay in its caves. The Mogao caves were carved into a cliff face just outside the town. Beginning in the 4th century CE, Buddhist monks hollowed out chambers in the rock, painting the walls with images of the Buddha, carving sculptures that still stand today. Over 1,000 years, nearly 500 caves were created. They contain over 2,000 sculptures and 45,000 square meters of murals, depicting religious scenes, daily life, and the many peoples who passed through Dunhuang. In one cave, sealed and forgotten for centuries, archaeologists discovered a library, thousands of manuscripts in Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, and other languages, including the world's oldest dated printed book, the Diamond Sutra, from the year 868 CE. Dunhuang was more than a rest stop. It was a sanctuary of faith and art, a testament to the spiritual dimension of the Silk Road. Continuing west, we reach Kashgar. If any city embodied the Silk Road, it was Kashgar. Here the northern and southern routes around the Taklamakan rejoined. Here roads branched to India, Persia, and the steppes. Here east truly met west. Kashgar's Sunday market has operated for over 2,000 years. Even today it draws traders from across Central Asia. They come to buy and sell livestock, carpets, spices and crafts, just as their ancestors did. The old city of Kashgar was a maze of narrow streets. Mud brick houses leaned against each other. Craftsmen worked in open shops. The tap of hammers on copper, the whir of spinning wheels, creating a symphony of labor. Mosques stood alongside Buddhist temples. The call to prayer mingled with the chanting of monks. This was the meeting place of civilizations, where no single culture dominated, and all were welcome to trade. Further west lay Samarkand. The name alone evokes mystery. Samarkand, the crossroads of cultures, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Central Asia. Alexander the Great captured Samarkand in 329 BCE and declared it more beautiful than he had imagined. The city traded hands many times over the centuries. Persians, Arabs, Mongols, and Turks all left their mark. But Samarkand reached its greatest glory under Timur, the Turco-Mongol conqueror known in the West as Tamerlane. In the 14th century, he made Samarkand his capital and filled it with treasures from his conquests. Timur brought artisans from across his empire. They built the Registan Square, 3 magnificent madrasas facing each other across a vast plaza, their facades covered in intricate tilework, blues and golds and turquoises, geometric patterns of infinite complexity. The Bibi Khanim Mosque, built by Timur to honor his wife, was one of the largest in the Islamic world. Its dome soared above the city, a symbol of power and devotion. Scholars gathered in Samarkand's libraries and observatories. The astronomer Ulugh Beg, Timur's grandson, built an observatory where he calculated the length of the year, accurate to within seconds of modern measurements. Samarkand was not merely a trading post. It was a center of learning and art, a place where the wealth of the Silk Road was transformed into lasting beauty. We could speak of many other cities. Bukhara, the pillar of Islam, with its hundreds of mosques. Merv, once the largest city in the world, now ruins in the Turkmenistan desert. Antioch and Alexandria, where East met the Mediterranean. And finally, Constantinople. For 1,000 years, Constantinople controlled the western terminus of the Silk Road. This city on the Bosporus, where Europe meets Asia, was the gateway between worlds. The markets of Constantinople dazzled visitors. Silk from China, spices from India, furs from Russia, amber from the Baltic, all flowed through its bazaars. The city's wealth was legendary. Its walls, its churches, its palaces, monuments to the riches the Silk Road brought. These cities were more than points on a map. They were nodes in a network, places where cultures collided and combined, where new ideas were born from old traditions. As you rest now, imagine walking through their streets. The sounds of commerce, the scent of spices, the faces of strangers who might become friends, the endless exchange that made the Silk Road live. What did merchants carry along those endless roads? The name tells us the most famous cargo, silk. Silk was born in China. According to legend, around 2700 BCE, the Empress Lezu sat beneath a mulberry tree, sipping tea, when a cocoon fell into her cup. As she tried to remove it, the cocoon unraveled, revealing a single shimmering thread. The Empress recognized the potential. She developed techniques to cultivate silkworms, to feed them mulberry leaves, to harvest their cocoons at just the right moment, and to unwind the delicate fibers without breaking them. For over 3,000 years, China guarded the secret of silk production. Revealing the process was punishable by death. No silkworm eggs, no mulberry seeds, no instructions could leave the empire, and so silk became the most valuable substance in the world. The fabric was like nothing else, lightweight yet strong, cool in summer, warm in winter. It draped beautifully on the body, catching light like liquid, available in colors that other fabrics could not hold. The Romans encountered silk during the reign of Julius Caesar. They were captivated. Senators wore silk togas to display their wealth. Despite laws limiting its use, demand only grew. At its peak, silk sold in Rome for its weight in gold. Some Romans believed it grew on trees. Others thought it was combed from the fur of animals. the truth remained a mystery. Eventually, around 550 CE, the secret escaped. Legend says that two monks smuggled silkworm eggs to Constantinople, hidden inside their hollow bamboo walking sticks. The Byzantine Empire began producing its own silk, but Chinese silk remained prized for its superior quality. Silk was the star, but many treasures traveled the Silk Road. Spices came from lands even further east. Pepper from India was so valuable, it was sometimes used as currency. A man's wealth might be measured in peppercorns, cinnamon and cassia, cardamom and ginger, cloves and nutmeg. These transformed the bland cuisine of medieval Europe and preserved food in an age before refrigeration. Porcelain traveled west from China. This ceramic, fired at temperatures European kilns could not achieve, was translucent, delicate and strong. Europeans called it white gold, and for centuries could not reproduce it. Jade moved in the opposite direction. The nephrite from Khotan in Central Asia was prized by Chinese emperors above all other stones. They believed jade had spiritual powers, could preserve the body after death, could bring long life to the living. Lapis lazuli, that deep blue stone from Afghanistan, colored the robes of European royalty and the paintings of Renaissance masters. The pigment ground from lapis, called ultramarine, was more expensive than gold. Animals too crossed the Silk Road. The heavenly horses of Fergana transformed Chinese cavalry, larger and faster than native breeds. They gave emperors a military advantage and became symbols of power and prestige. Bactrian camels, with their two humps, were the trucks of the ancient world. These animals could carry 200 kilograms, survive for days without water, and navigate deserts with an almost supernatural sense of direction. Exotic animals traveled as diplomatic gifts. Lions and leopards, elephants and rhinoceroses made their way to Chinese courts and Roman circuses, ambassadors of lands most people would never see. Glass flowed eastward from Rome and Syria. The Chinese, masters of so many crafts, had not developed glassmaking to the same degree. Roman glassware was prized in Chang'an, just as Chinese silk was treasured in Rome. Precious metals formed the currency of trade. Gold and silver coins from Rome, Persia, and China circulated along the routes. Archaeologists have found Roman coins in China and Chinese coins in Scandinavia, testament to the reach of commerce. Textiles of all kinds crossed the roads. Wool from the steppes, cotton from India, linen from Egypt, carpets from Persia, famous then as now. Embroidered fabrics carrying the artistic traditions of a dozen cultures. Even plants and agricultural knowledge traveled. Grapes and winemaking techniques spread from Persia to China. Alfalfa, essential for feeding horses, was introduced to Chinese farmers. Sesame and coriander, pomegranates and walnuts, all followed the merchants east. But perhaps the most valuable cargo could not be weighed or measured. Ideas traveled the Silk Road. Religions spread from land to land. Scientific knowledge was exchanged. Artistic styles merged and evolved. Languages borrowed words from each other. Stories passed from mouth to mouth across continents. A merchant might carry silk in his saddlebags, but in his mind he carried the sum of everything he had seen, every conversation, every custom, every belief encountered on his journey. And when he returned home, he brought not just goods to sell, but a world expanded beyond imagining. As you rest now, think of all that moved along those ancient roads, the tangible and the intangible, the precious and the practical. The Silk Road carried the best of human creativity, from one end of the world to the other. Let us now join a caravan. The sun has barely risen over Dunhuang, but the caravanserai is already alive with activity. Camels groan as handlers load their burdens. Merchants check their accounts one final time. Guides study the sky, reading the weather. Our caravan master is a Sogdian. His people have dominated Silk Road trade for centuries. From their homeland in what is now Uzbekistan, the Sogdians spread across the routes, establishing trading colonies as far as China. They were the middlemen of the ancient world, speaking multiple languages, understanding the customs of many cultures, knowing which officials needed bribing, which routes were safe, which were dangerous. The caravan assembles. 300 camels arranged in a long column, perhaps 50 merchants, each with his own goods, plus guards, guides, translators, and servants. A small city on the move. The Bactrian camel is essential to this enterprise. With 2 humps instead of 1, this animal is built for the harsh conditions ahead. Its thick coat protects against both cold and heat. Its wide feet spread its weight across shifting sand. It can drink over 100 liters of water in minutes, then go for days without more. Each camel carries about 200 kilograms, divided evenly on either side to balance the load. Silk is light and valuable. Perfect cargo. Porcelain requires careful packing. Spices must be protected from moisture. The handlers tie the camels together in strings of perhaps 8. Each string follows the one ahead. The led camel wears a bell. Its ringing creates a rhythm for the march and tells the handlers if the line has broken. We set off into the desert. The pace is slow, perhaps 4 kilometers per hour. There is no rushing through the wilderness. Haste leads to exhaustion, injury, death. The journey will take as long as it takes. During the day's hottest hours, we rest, finding what shade we can behind dunes or in dry riverbeds. The camels kneel, their loads still in place. Merchants sleep or tend to their accounts. In the early morning and late afternoon we walk, sometimes through the night when the moon is bright, the desert cold after sunset, but movement keeps us warm, and the stars guide our way. After a long day's march, we approach a caravanserai. These roadside inns were spaced about 30 kilometers apart, a day's journey. They appeared wherever travelers needed rest, built by governments to encourage trade, or by merchants as investments. A caravanserai was a fortress of hospitality. High walls protected against bandits and sandstorms. A single entrance could be locked at night. Inside, a large courtyard provided space for animals. Rooms around the perimeter housed travelers. Here was water from a well or spring, food prepared in the kitchens, perhaps a bathhouse to wash away the dust, a mosque or shrine for prayer, stables and storage for goods. Merchants gathered in the common areas, trading news and information, negotiating deals. Sometimes goods changed hands here, one merchant's journey ending, another's beginning. The caravanserai was a place of safety in an unsafe world, a small civilization in the wilderness, where the laws of hospitality protected all who entered. Life on the road followed strict customs. Merchants formed partnerships to share risks. If one lost his cargo to bandits or storms, the loss was divided among all. This distributed risk made long-distance trade possible. Trade guilds established rules and standards, ensuring quality and fair dealing. A merchant who cheated might find himself banned from the caravanserais. His name passed along the network as untrustworthy. Letters of credit allowed merchants to travel without carrying large amounts of coins. A merchant in Chang'an could deposit money with a trusted agent, receive a letter promising payment, and collect his funds in Samarkand from the agent's partner. This early banking system made the Silk Road function. The journey from Chang'an to Constantinople might take over a year. Few, if any, merchants completed the entire route. Instead, each knew his segment of the road. A Chinese merchant might carry silk from Chang'an to Dunhuang. There he would sell to a Sogdian, who carried it to Kashgar. In Kashgar, a Persian might buy it, transporting it to Baghdad. From Baghdad, a Syrian might take it to Antioch. And from Antioch, a Greek might bring it finally to Constantinople. Each exchange added to the price. Each merchant took his profit. By the time silk reached Rome, it had made many fortunes along the way. The merchants themselves were remarkable people. They spent years away from their families. Some never returned home at all, dying on the road or settling in distant lands. They learned multiple languages, adapted to different customs, ate unfamiliar foods, and worshipped with different faiths. They were bridges between worlds, carrying not just goods but news, ideas, and understanding. A merchant might describe Chinese inventions to Persians, Persian poetry to Arabs, Arab mathematics to Europeans. In their saddlebags, they carried the material goods of trade. In their minds, they carried the accumulated knowledge of 100 cultures. They were the original globalizers, making the world smaller one journey at a time. As you rest now, imagine yourself among them. The creak of leather, the sway of the camel beneath you, the endless horizon ahead. the stars emerging as night falls. You are part of something larger than yourself, a network spanning continents, a tradition stretching back centuries, a caravan of humanity moving through time. The Silk Road was not for the faint of heart. Every merchant who set out knew the risks. Many who departed never returned, their bones bleached in deserts, their graves unmarked on mountainsides. The road demanded courage and exacted a terrible price. Let us speak of the dangers. Bandits haunted the remoter stretches. In the mountain passes where caravans moved slowly through narrow defiles, thieves waited in ambush. They struck fast and hard, killing guards, scattering merchants, taking everything of value. The northern route between Dunhuang and Kucha was especially notorious. Here the Taklamakan pressed close against the mountains, leaving little room to maneuver. Raiders could strike from the hills and disappear into the desert. Merchants traveled in large groups for protection. The biggest caravans might have hundreds of guards, but numbers were no guarantee. A well-organized bandit army could overwhelm even substantial defenses. Some merchants paid tribute to local chieftains, essentially bribes for safe passage. This protection money added to the cost of goods, but was often cheaper than fighting. The desert itself was deadly. The Taklamakan earned its fearsome name. This sea of shifting sand stretched endlessly. Dunes rose and fell in patterns only the wind understood. Landmarks disappeared overnight, buried or rearranged. Sandstorms struck without warning. The sky turned yellow, then brown, then black. Wind screamed, driving sand into eyes and lungs. Visibility dropped to nothing. Travelers huddled together, covering their faces, praying the storm would pass before they suffocated. Some storms lasted for days. Caravans caught in the open were buried where they stood. Archaeologists have found remains of traders still clutching their goods, preserved by the dry desert air for centuries. Water was the constant obsession. In the desert you could survive perhaps 3 days without water. Oases were scattered, sometimes 100 kilometers apart. If you missed one, or found it dry, death was nearly certain. Mirages tormented travelers. The shimmering lakes that weren't there, the cities that dissolved as you approached. The mind played tricks in the heat. Some wandered off chasing visions, and were never seen again. Experienced guides knew the signs of water. They read the plants, the movements of animals. They knew which dry riverbeds might still hold moisture beneath the surface. Such knowledge was worth more than gold. The mountains presented different terrors. The passes of the Pamirs and Karakoram rose above 5,000 meters. At such heights, the air holds barely half the oxygen of sea level. Altitude sickness struck without regard for strength or youth. Symptoms began subtly: headache, fatigue, loss of appetite, but they could progress rapidly to confusion, loss of coordination, death. The only cure was descent, but descent might mean abandoning goods, animals, even companions. Cold killed as readily as lack of oxygen. Temperatures in the high passes dropped far below freezing. Blizzards could trap caravans for days. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. Hypothermia took those who could not stay warm. The narrow paths wound along cliff edges. A single misstep sent travelers tumbling into chasms. Rockfalls blocked the way. Avalanches swept away entire parties. Disease traveled the Silk Road as surely as silk. The close quarters of caravanserais spread illness quickly. Travelers from distant lands carried germs to which local people had no immunity. Epidemics could devastate entire regions. The Black Death itself may have traveled the Silk Road. Originating somewhere in Central Asia, the plague spread westward along the trade routes, reaching Europe in 1347, killing perhaps half the population. Other diseases followed the merchants: leprosy, anthrax, smallpox. The very connectivity that made the Silk Road prosperous also made it a highway for pestilence. Political instability added another layer of risk. Empires rose and fell along the routes. Wars disrupted trade for years at a time. Borders shifted, requiring new permits, new bribes, new allies. A merchant might set out when the road was peaceful, only to find months later that war had closed the way forward. He could wait, hoping for peace, or take dangerous detours through bandit territory. Even in peacetime, officials could be capricious. A governor might decide to increase tolls, a general might commandeer goods for his army. Merchants had little recourse against those with power. Those who survived the journey often left traces of their passage. In caves along the route, travelers carved inscriptions. Some recorded their names and destinations. Others offered prayers for safe arrival. Many expressed the fear that they might not return. These inscriptions are poignant reminders of the human cost of the Silk Road, of the courage required to set forth, of the faith that sustained travelers through hardship. As you rest now, in comfort and safety, spare a thought for those ancient merchants who risked everything for the promise of profit, who faced dangers we can barely imagine, who made the Silk Road not with governments or armies, but with their own footsteps, their own sweat, their own lives. The Silk Road carried more than merchandise. Ideas traveled these routes, art and music, language and literature. The cultures that lined the road did not merely trade goods, they traded themselves. Let us explore this exchange. Art transformed as it moved across the continent. When Buddhism spread from India to China, it brought with it the traditions of Indian sculpture. But as the religion moved along the Silk Road, it encountered Greek influences, left over from the conquests of Alexander. In the region called Gandhara, in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, artists created something new, Buddhist images with Greek features. The Buddha depicted in flowing robes like a Roman senator, with realistic musculature and naturalistic poses. This Greco-Buddhist art spread along the Silk Road, influencing the Buddhist art of China, Korea, and Japan. The Mogao caves at Dunhuang preserve this artistic journey. In the earliest caves, Indian influences dominate. Figures have rounded bodies and sensuous poses. Later caves show Central Asian styles, figures more linear, colors more vibrant. Still later caves reflect Chinese aesthetics, with landscape backgrounds and Confucian themes. Walk through the Mogao caves, and you walk through art history, watching styles blend and transform over 1,000 years. Music traveled the routes with special ease. Instruments moved from culture to culture. The oud, ancestor of the European lute, originated in Persia, traveled east to become the Chinese pipa, and west to become the guitar. The sheng, a Chinese mouth organ, may have influenced the development of European accordion and organ. String instruments evolved as they moved, acquiring new tuning systems, new playing techniques. Musicians themselves traveled with caravans, entertaining merchants in caravanserais, performing at courts along the way. They carried melodies across borders, spreading songs that evolved into new forms in each land they touched. Tang dynasty Chang'an was famous for its Central Asian music. Sogdian musicians played in the imperial court. Their exotic rhythms and unfamiliar scales enchanted Chinese audiences and influenced Chinese music for centuries after. Languages intermixed constantly. Traders needed to communicate, and so they developed pidgins, simplified languages for commerce. These pidgins borrowed words from many sources, creating new vocabularies understood along the routes. Some words traveled remarkable distances. The English word silk derives from Latin sericum, which came from Greek serikos, which derived from Chinese words for the fabric. The word traveled the full length of the Silk Road, transforming at each stage. The word caravan itself comes from Persian karwan. Many terms related to trade have such origins, reflecting the Persian dominance of Silk Road commerce. Even personal names spread along the routes. A merchant might adopt different names in different cultures, using Chinese names in China, Persian names in Persia, a reflection of the multiple identities required for cross-cultural trade. Food and drink crossed borders. Grapes and winemaking techniques spread from Persia to China. Chinese merchants returned from the West with new fruits and vegetables. Cucumbers and pomegranates, sesame and coriander, all entered Chinese cuisine through Silk Road trade. Tea moved in the opposite direction. Originally a Chinese beverage, it spread to Tibet, Central Asia, and eventually to Europe. Brick tea, compressed for easy transport on camelback, became a staple of the routes. Cooking techniques were exchanged. Stir-frying moved west, ovens moved east. Spices transformed cuisines everywhere they went. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves. turning bland food into something memorable. Games and leisure pursuits traveled too. Chess originated in India, moved to Persia where it became shatranj, and then spread both west to Europe and east to China and Japan. In each culture it evolved differently, but the fundamental game remained recognizable. Polo, the sport of Central Asian horsemen, spread along the trade routes, reaching China, Persia, and eventually England, where it became a pastime of aristocrats. Stories and legends crossed borders. The tales of Sinbad mixed Persian and Indian elements. Chinese stories incorporated Central Asian characters. The world of imagination expanded as storytellers exchanged narratives. Architecture blended traditions. The mosques and madrasas of Samarkand and Bukhara combined Persian design with Central Asian techniques. Their distinctive blue tiles reflect technologies developed over centuries of exchange. Buddhist cave temples drew on Indian, Persian, and Chinese traditions. Rock-cut architecture from India, painting techniques from Persia, organizational principles from China, all merged in places like Dunhuang and Bamiyan. Even domestic architecture was influenced. Courtyard houses in Chinese Turkestan show Persian influences, while Chinese building techniques spread westward into Central Asia. This cultural exchange was the Silk Road's greatest legacy. Goods were consumed and forgotten. Gold was spent, silk wore out. But the ideas that traveled the routes transformed civilizations permanently. The Silk Road created a kind of world culture, different from any single tradition, enriched by contributions from every land it touched. This cultural mixing was unprecedented in human history, and would not be matched until the modern age of globalization. As you rest now, consider the threads that connect us all, the music we hear, the food we eat, the games we play. So much of what we take for granted traveled along those ancient roads, from hands we'll never shake, from minds we'll never know, gifts from strangers across time and space. Faith moved along the Silk Road, the same paths that carried silk and spices, carried prophets and pilgrims, monks and missionaries. The great religions of the world spread along these routes, transforming cultures from China to the Mediterranean. Let us trace this spiritual journey. Buddhism was perhaps the first great religion to travel the Silk Road. Born in India around the 5th century BCE, Buddhism remained largely confined to the subcontinent for several hundred years. But as trade increased along the Silk Road, monks began to accompany merchant caravans. They traveled on foot, carrying little, depending on the generosity of merchants for food and transport. In return, they offered blessings for safe journey, and the promise of spiritual merit for those who supported them. By the 1st century CE, Buddhism had reached China. Merchants and monks established temples in the trading cities. Chinese pilgrims began traveling westward in search of sacred texts. The monk Xuanzang is perhaps the most famous. In the 7th century, he walked from China to India, a journey of 16 years. He returned with over 600 Buddhist manuscripts and spent the rest of his life translating them. His journey inspired one of China's greatest novels, Journey to the West, with its beloved character the Monkey King. Even in fiction, the Silk Road's spiritual dimension endured. The physical evidence of Buddhism lines the Silk Road. The Mogao caves at Dunhuang, the giant Buddhas of Bamiyan, destroyed by the Taliban in 2001, the monastery at Takhti Bahi in Pakistan, the cave temples of Ajanta in India. These sites attracted pilgrims from across the Buddhist world, creating a network of sacred spaces where travelers could rest, study, and worship. The spread of Buddhism transformed Chinese culture. New concepts of karma and rebirth, new approaches to meditation and enlightenment, new forms of art and architecture, all entered China along the Silk Road. Other faiths traveled the same paths. Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia, spread eastward through Central Asia. Its dualistic theology, the battle between light and darkness, influenced religions from Judaism to Buddhism. Zoroastrian temples once dotted the Silk Road cities, fire temples where priests maintained eternal flames. Merchants carried their faith with them as they traveled, establishing communities far from home. Christianity too reached the east. Nestorian Christianity, a branch that emphasized the human nature of Jesus, was expelled from the Roman Empire in the 5th century. The Nestorians moved eastward, finding refuge along the Silk Road. By the 7th century, Nestorian churches existed in China. The Nestorian stele, erected in Xi'an in 781 CE, records the arrival of Christianity in China in 635. It describes the religion in terms designed to resonate with Chinese culture. Speaking of the luminous religion, Nestorian monasteries existed in many Silk Road cities. Their manuscripts, some discovered only in the 20th century, reveal a Christianity adapted to Asian contexts, blending with local traditions while maintaining core beliefs. Manichaeism offered yet another path. Founded by the prophet Mani in 3rd century Persia, Manichaeism was a syncretic religion, combining elements of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism. It taught that the world was a battlefield between light and darkness, and that human souls were fragments of light trapped in dark matter. Manichaeans were great missionaries. Their faith spread rapidly along the Silk Road, reaching China by the 7th century. For a time, Manichaeism was the state religion of the Uyghur Empire in Central Asia. Though Manichaeism eventually died out, its influence persisted in other religions, and its texts, preserved in Central Asian caves, offer insights into ancient theology. And then came Islam. After the Arab conquests of the 7th century, Islam spread rapidly along the Silk Road. By the 8th century, Muslim merchants dominated trade in Central Asia. Islam's appeal was practical as well as spiritual. The religion provided a common framework for commerce. Sharia law established rules for contracts and disputes. Muslim merchants trusted each other across cultural boundaries. The cities of the Silk Road were transformed. Mosques and madrasas replaced temples and monasteries. Arabic script became the language of learning. The distinctive architecture of Islamic civilization, the domes and minarets, the geometric tilework, rose in Samarkand and Bukhara, Kashgar and Dunhuang. Today, Islam remains the dominant religion of Central Asia, a legacy of the Silk Road's role in spreading faith. Even Judaism found a place along the routes. Jewish merchant communities existed in many Silk Road cities. The so-called Radhanites were Jewish traders, who reportedly traveled the full length of the route, speaking multiple languages, trusted by Muslims and Christians alike. In Kaifeng, China, a Jewish community persisted for over 1,000 years, descended from Silk Road merchants who settled there, maintaining their traditions far from any other Jewish population. The Silk Road was never just about commerce. It was a highway of the spirit, where faiths met and mingled, where missionaries carried their beliefs across continents, where syncretism created new forms of devotion. In some ways, religion was the glue that held the Silk Road together. Shared faith created trust between strangers. Temples and monasteries provided hospitality for travelers. Pilgrimage created flows of people independent of trade. As you rest now, imagine the pilgrims walking these roads, their footsteps heavy with purpose, their hearts light with faith, seeking truth in distant lands, finding it perhaps in the journey itself. The Silk Road was a conduit of invention. Technologies developed in one civilization spread along the routes to others, transforming economies, warfare, and daily life. Some of these transfers changed the course of history. Let us explore this exchange of knowledge. Paper is perhaps the most important technology to travel the Silk Road. The Chinese invented paper around the 2nd century BCE. Using bark, hemp, and other fibers, they created a writing surface far cheaper than silk or bamboo. Paper democratized literacy in China, making books available to many more people. For centuries, the secret of papermaking remained in China. But in 751 CE, at the Battle of Talas in Central Asia, Arab forces defeated a Chinese army. Among the prisoners were papermakers. The Arabs recognized the value of this technology. They brought the craftsmen to Samarkand and established paper mills there. Within decades, paper was being produced across the Islamic world. Paper reached Europe by the 12th century. Spanish mills produced it from the 13th century. And with paper came an explosion of knowledge. Books became cheaper, learning more widespread. The Renaissance and the Reformation depended on plentiful paper, all traceable to that single battle on the Silk Road. Printing followed paper westward. The Chinese invented printing, both woodblock and movable type. Buddhist texts were among the first printed books. The Diamond Sutra, from 868 CE, found at Dunhuang, is the oldest dated printed book in the world. Knowledge of printing spread gradually along the routes. By the time it reached Europe, centuries had passed. Gutenberg's printing press in the 15th century combined movable type with the screw press, creating a technology that transformed civilization. Whether Gutenberg knew of Chinese precedents is debated, but the ideas had traveled the Silk Road and were in the air of the age. Gunpowder's journey reshaped the world. Chinese alchemists invented gunpowder around the 9th century, seeking, ironically, an elixir of immortality. They found instead a formula for destruction. The Chinese developed gunpowder weapons, fire lances and bombs, rockets and early guns. These technologies spread westward along the Silk Road, reaching the Islamic world by the 13th century, Europe by the 14th. European engineers refined the technology, creating cannons that could breach castle walls, firearms that could defeat armored knights. The age of gunpowder warfare had begun. The empires of the early modern period, Ottoman, Mughal, Safavid, were called gunpowder empires. Their power rested on weapons that had traveled the Silk Road. The compass enabled exploration. Chinese inventors discovered that magnetized iron would point north. They used this principle for divination at first. But by the 11th century, compasses were guiding ships. The technology spread to the Islamic world and Europe. By the 13th century, European sailors were using compasses. They could navigate far from shore, crossing oceans their ancestors had feared. The age of exploration, with all its consequences, depended on the humble compass, another gift of the Silk Road. Silk production itself was a closely guarded secret. For millennia, only China knew how to cultivate silkworms. The process, called sericulture, requires mulberry trees, careful temperature control, and precise timing of harvest. Around 550 CE, the secret finally escaped. Legend says that 2 monks smuggled silkworm eggs to Constantinople, hidden in their hollow bamboo walking sticks. The Byzantine Empire began producing its own silk, yet Chinese silk remained prized for its superior quality. The technology transfer was complete, but the original remained the best. Agricultural innovations traveled both ways. From the West, China received grapes and winemaking, alfalfa for horse fodder, sesame and coriander, cucumbers and pomegranates. These transformed Chinese cuisine and agriculture. From China, the West received tea and the techniques for cultivating rice. Irrigation methods, advanced by Chinese engineers, spread to Central Asia and beyond. Horses themselves were exchanged. The Fergana horses, tall and swift, revolutionized Chinese cavalry, while Chinese breeding techniques improved herds across Central Asia. Medical knowledge crossed borders. Greek medical texts were translated into Arabic and studied in the great hospitals of Baghdad and Samarkand. Chinese medicine contributed acupuncture and herbal remedies. Indian Ayurvedic traditions influenced both East and West. The Silk Road created a shared medical heritage. Physicians drew on traditions from multiple cultures, creating syntheses that advanced healing everywhere. Mathematics and astronomy traveled the routes. Indian mathematicians invented the number system we use today, including the concept of zero. Arabs adopted and refined this system and transmitted it to Europe. The so-called Arabic numerals are really Indian numerals, carried by the Silk Road through the Islamic world. Astronomical knowledge was shared. Chinese star catalogues influenced Islamic astronomers. Islamic observations improved European understanding. The observatories of Samarkand and Beijing reflected this exchange of cosmic knowledge. The Silk Road was an engine of innovation. Technologies developed in isolation, spread and combined in new ways. Each civilization contributed its genius and benefited from the genius of others. We are all heirs of this exchange. The paper on which we write, the compass in our phones, the medicines we take, the numbers we calculate, all carry the fingerprints of the Silk Road. As you rest now, consider the inventions that surround you, each one the product of countless minds, across continents and centuries, connected by the ancient roads of trade. Among all who traveled the Silk Road, some left behind accounts of their journeys. Their words bring the ancient road to life, and none more so than Marco Polo. Let us meet these remarkable voyagers. Marco Polo left Venice in 1271. He was 17 years old. His father Niccolo and uncle Maffeo had already made the journey once. They had reached the court of Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor of China, and had returned with an invitation to bring priests and scholars back. The Pope could spare only 2 Dominican friars, and these turned back when the going got tough. But the Polos pressed on, through Persia, over the Pamirs, across the deserts of Central Asia. 3.5 years after leaving Venice, they arrived at the summer palace of Kublai Khan. The great Khan was fascinated by his European visitors. Marco Polo was young, intelligent, and curious. He learned Mongol languages quickly. He observed the customs of the court with keen eyes. Kublai Khan recognized his talents. For 17 years, Marco Polo served the emperor. He was sent on diplomatic missions across Asia, to lands no European had ever visited: Burma and India, Indonesia and Sri Lanka, Vietnam and the far reaches of China. He saw cities that dwarfed anything in Europe: Hangzhou, with its millions of residents. Venice seemed a village by comparison. He saw technologies unknown in the West: paper money, coal for heating, postal relays. He saw customs that amazed and sometimes shocked him: the binding of women's feet, the burning of the dead, customs strange to European eyes, yet part of sophisticated civilizations. Finally, in 1292, the Polos began their journey home. They escorted a Mongol princess to Persia for marriage, traveling by sea around India. It was a perilous voyage. Of the 600 who set out, only 18 survived. From Persia, they made their way overland to Venice, arriving in 1295, 24 years after their departure. The story says that their relatives did not recognize them. Their clothes were foreign, their manner strange. Only when they ripped open the seams of their garments, revealing fortunes in sewn-in jewels, did their family believe who they were. Marco Polo dictated his adventures while a prisoner of war in Genoa. His cellmate, a writer named Rustichello of Pisa, recorded his tales in a book called Il Milione, the million, referring perhaps to the vast numbers Marco used. The book caused a sensation. Europeans read of coal and paper money, of asbestos and oil wells. Many thought Marco Polo a liar. His stories seemed too fantastic to be true, but he insisted on their accuracy. On his deathbed, friends urged him to retract his claims, to confess his exaggerations. Marco Polo replied, "I did not tell half of what I saw." Marco Polo was not alone in his travels. Centuries earlier, the Chinese monk Xuanzang had made his own epic journey. In 629 CE, Xuanzang left China for India, seeking original Buddhist texts. The Tang emperor had forbidden foreign travel, but Xuanzang went anyway. For 16 years he traveled, through Central Asia, into India, through the subcontinent. He studied at the great Buddhist University of Nalanda. He debated with scholars, visited sacred sites, collected over 600 manuscripts. When he returned to China in 645 CE, the emperor who had forbidden his departure welcomed him as a hero. Xuanzang spent the rest of his life translating his texts, creating foundational works of Chinese Buddhism. His journey inspired Journey to the West, the beloved Chinese novel featuring the Monkey King. In imagination, Xuanzang travels still. Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan traveler, covered even more ground than Marco Polo. He left Tangier in 1325 at the age of 21 and did not return home for 24 years. He traveled over 120,000 kilometers, visiting every Muslim country of his time. He journeyed across the Sahara, through East Africa, to India, where he served as a judge for the Sultan. He visited China, Southeast Asia, Spain, and Mali, recording his observations in a book called the Rila. Unlike Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta traveled within a cultural sphere he knew. The Islamic world provided familiar customs, familiar laws, yet he still encountered marvels and wonders, still expanded the horizons of those who read his words. Rabban bar Sauma made an extraordinary journey in the opposite direction. A Nestorian Christian monk born near Beijing, he traveled westward to the Holy Land in 1275, a time of crusades and religious ferment. He was received by the Byzantine emperor, by the Pope in Rome, by the kings of France and England. He celebrated Mass with cardinals in Paris and Bordeaux, becoming the first Chinese person documented to visit Europe. His journey shows that the Silk Road ran both ways, east to west and west to east, a bridge across the world. These travelers were exceptional, but they were not alone. Countless merchants, pilgrims and adventurers walked the roads. Most left no record of their passage. Their experiences are lost to us. But the travelers who wrote, who dictated their stories to patient scribes, they gave us windows into a vanished world. They showed us the Silk Road through human eyes, making the ancient routes come alive. As you rest now, imagine yourself a traveler, setting out into the unknown, with nothing but your courage and curiosity, your journey stretching before you, endless with possibility. The Mongols transformed the Silk Road. Under their rule, the ancient routes experienced a golden age. Trade flourished as never before, and the world became smaller. Let us explore this remarkable period. Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes in 1206. From the steppes of Central Asia, he led his horsemen to conquer an empire. Within his lifetime, Mongol control extended from China to Persia, the largest contiguous land empire in history. The Mongol conquests were devastating. Cities that resisted were destroyed, populations massacred, the accumulated wealth of centuries carried off as loot. But out of destruction came a new order. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, settled over the lands. The Mongols, great warriors, were also great organizers. They established law across their empire, punished banditry severely, guaranteed safe passage to merchants and envoys. For the first time, a single authority controlled most of the Silk Road. No more competing kingdoms with different rules. No more tolls at every border. A merchant with the right papers could travel from Italy to China, under the protection of the Khan. Trade volume increased dramatically. Goods that had been rare became common. Chinese silks flooded European markets. European merchants established themselves in Chinese cities. The Mongols encouraged cultural exchange. They were remarkably tolerant of religions. Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities flourished side by side. The Mongols sampled all faiths, finding useful ideas in each. They brought experts from across their empire to serve the Khan. Muslim astronomers worked alongside Chinese engineers. Persian administrators governed Chinese provinces. European craftsmen created wonders for Mongol patrons. The court of Kublai Khan, which Marco Polo described, was perhaps the most cosmopolitan place on earth. Representatives of every major civilization gathered in the Mongol capital. The postal system called the Yam epitomized Mongol efficiency. Relay stations were established across the empire, perhaps every 40 kilometers. Fresh horses waited at each station. Riders could cover 200 miles a day. Messages flashed across continents at unprecedented speed. A decree from the Khan could reach distant governors in days. News traveled almost as fast as modern mail. Merchants could use the Yam in emergencies, though they were expected to pay. The system made the empire feel connected, its far-flung provinces part of a single whole. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, epitomized the era. He completed the conquest of China, establishing the Yuan dynasty. For the first time, all of China was ruled by foreigners. Kublai was a cultured man, curious about everything. He patronized poets and painters, astronomers and inventors. He welcomed foreigners to his court, granting them privileges his own subjects did not enjoy. Foreign merchants were exempt from taxation. They could travel freely, trade without restriction. The Khan understood that trade enriched his empire, and he did everything to encourage it. Yet the Mongol era also carried danger. The very connectivity that enhanced trade also spread disease. When plague broke out in Central Asia in the 1340s, it traveled the Silk Road with terrifying speed. The Black Death reached Europe in 1347. By 1352, perhaps half the population of Europe was dead. Similar devastation struck China, Persia, the Middle East. The roads that carried silk and spices also carried death. The Mongol Empire did not last. After Kublai Khan's death in 1294, the empire fragmented. His successors quarreled over succession. Provincial governors asserted independence. The unity that had made the Pax Mongolica possible dissolved into competing khanates. By the mid-14th century, the Silk Road was becoming dangerous again. Bandits returned to the mountain passes. Local rulers imposed new tolls and restrictions. The Golden Age was ending. But its legacy endured. The Mongol period had shown what was possible when the Silk Road was truly open. The taste for Eastern goods had been whetted, the routes proven safe when properly governed. Future ages would seek to recreate that connectivity by sea routes around Africa and across the oceans. The Age of Exploration was, in some ways, an attempt to recapture the Mongol achievement. As you rest now, imagine the Mongol roads at their peak, the endless caravans moving unimpeded, the empire of horses and trade and culture, spanning the world. All things must end. By the 16th century, the overland Silk Road had largely fallen silent. The caravanserais stood empty. The oasis cities shrank. The ancient routes were reclaimed by desert and mountain. Let us trace this decline and consider the legacy that remains. The Black Death of the 14th century devastated the Silk Road. Whole cities were depopulated. Trade networks were shattered. The labor force that maintained roads and caravanserais simply no longer existed. Recovery was slow and incomplete. Many routes never reopened. The infrastructure of trade decayed. The collapse of the Mongol Empire fragmented control. Where once a single pass had granted access to the entire road, now dozens of petty rulers demanded tribute. Each border crossing meant new tolls, new bribes, new delays. The cost of overland trade rose sharply. Margins that had been comfortable became impossible. Merchants sought alternatives. The Ottoman Empire posed new challenges. When the Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453, they controlled the western terminus of the Silk Road. They imposed new taxes on goods passing through, favoring Muslim traders over Christians. European merchants, long accustomed to the Eastern trade, found themselves squeezed out. They needed to find new routes that bypassed Ottoman control, and so they took to the seas. Portuguese sailors had been pushing down the African coast. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea. The sea route was revolutionary. Ships could carry far more cargo than camel caravans. The journey was faster, often safer. There were no borders to cross, no tolls to pay. Within decades, the maritime route dominated trade. Spices that had traveled overland for millennia now came by ship. The overland Silk Road was obsolete. Other factors contributed to the decline. Climate change affected the oases. Some dried up as precipitation patterns shifted. Others were buried by advancing sands. Political instability in Central Asia continued. The great Silk Road cities fell into decline. Samarkand and Bukhara became backwaters, remembered glories of the past. The Silk Road faded from memory. For centuries, Westerners forgot the ancient roots. Only scholars recalled the names of once great cities. Yet the legacy never truly disappeared. The genetic heritage of the Silk Road lives on. Populations across Eurasia carry the markers of ancient mixing. The merchants and soldiers, pilgrims and migrants, left their descendants from China to Spain. Languages still carry Silk Road vocabulary. The foods we eat, the games we play, the music we hear, all bear traces of that ancient exchange. The religions that spread along the routes continue to shape billions of lives. Buddhism in East Asia, Islam in Central Asia, Christianity worldwide, all owe something to the Silk Road. In recent decades, interest in the Silk Road has revived. Archaeologists uncover new sites, discovering manuscripts and artifacts preserved by desert sands. Each find adds to our understanding. UNESCO has designated many Silk Road sites as World Heritage locations, recognizing their importance to human civilization. China's Belt and Road Initiative invokes the Silk Road's legacy, seeking to recreate ancient connectivity with modern infrastructure. Whether it will succeed remains to be seen, but the dream of connection endures. What should we remember of the Silk Road? Perhaps most importantly, that humanity's greatest achievements come through exchange. When cultures meet and share, when ideas flow freely across borders, civilization advances. The Silk Road was never just about silk, it was about curiosity, courage, and connection, about the human desire to know what lies beyond the horizon, about the willingness to risk everything for knowledge and gain. The merchants who walked those routes carried not just goods but possibilities. Each transaction was an act of trust between strangers, each journey an adventure into the unknown. As you drift now towards sleep, carry with you the spirit of the Silk Road, the whisper of camel bells in the distance, the scent of spices on desert wind, the stars that guided travelers home. For 2,000 years, humanity walked those paths, and the world was made smaller, richer, more connected. The ancient roads may lie silent now, but their legacy lives on in all of us. Sleep now, and dream of distant lands, of silk and silver, ideas and beliefs, of the endless road that stretches before us, connecting past to present, and present to future. The Silk Road never truly ends. It continues in every exchange between peoples, in every curiosity about the wider world, in every journey begun with hope. Rest now, the caravan moves on, and peace follows in its wake. The journey is complete. We have traveled from Chang'an to Constantinople, from the Han Dynasty to the Age of Exploration. We have met merchants and monks, emperors and adventurers. We have crossed deserts and mountains, oceans of sand and seas of grass. The Silk Road was humanity's first global network, a web of paths connecting civilizations that had never known each other existed. Along these routes flowed silk and spices, silver and gold. But more importantly, there flowed ideas. Ideas about the gods and the cosmos, about medicine and mathematics, about art and architecture, about what it means to be human in a vast and varied world. The merchants who walked those roads are gone now. Their caravanserais have crumbled to dust. The oases where they rested have dried up or been buried. But their legacy endures. In the words we speak and the numbers we use, in the foods we eat and the beliefs we hold, in the very fabric of our interconnected world, we are all children of the Silk Road. And now, as sleep claims you, know that you are part of this story, connected to millions who came before, and millions who will come after. The road stretches endlessly before us, and the journey never truly ends. Rest now, in the peace of connection, in the comfort of belonging to something vast and enduring. The Silk Road carries you home. Good night.